Thank you for listening, friend. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you don't want to miss any wisdom or encouragement, be sure to subscribe to the show. And don't forget to rate and review. Your feedback means so much and helps our community grow. If you're looking for more wellness wisdom and free resources, head over to livingwiselywell.com or get connected with me on Instagram at wiselywell. And if you're looking for a break from the hurried health lifestyle, check out my Return to Rest resource for tangible ways to slow down and finally find rest. Hey friends, welcome back to the If Only I Were Wiser podcast. On today's episode, I have Isabel Jones, who will chat with us about all things wild birth, wild pregnancy, and having a baby with as little intervention as possible. In this episode, we also chat about the intentionality in your birth environment as well as your postpartum care team. So let's go ahead and dive in. Welcome, Isabel, to the If Only I Were Wiser podcast.
Hello.
I would love to start by introducing you to our community. What does life look like for you? Just a little bit about you and your family.
Yeah, so I'm Isabel Jones. I am the creator of the Instagram account Your Wild Birth. That space is constantly evolving. It's been through many iterations, but the one constant is that I'm on there sharing education and information on birth, postpartum, motherhood, marriage. And then I usually always have workbooks available for people to engage with. So those are the constants, but what it's going to be tomorrow, who knows?
That's okay. And with the world of Instagram, I feel like everybody's kind of on the same page with that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's just always trying to figure out how to best serve the community. So, everyone needs different things at different times.
Absolutely. How has your family kind of played a role in the creation of Your Wild Birth?
I mean, they are the whole of it, really. I mean, I think that my family is the inspiration for everything that I do, which is a very stereotypical thing. I mean, of course, you have kids and then your whole world revolves around them. But I really feel like every day is an opportunity to just become a bigger person, a better person, and to just discover more about who I really am. And I think that, that's the gift that they offer me. And that's what Your Wild Birth is all about. It's about discovering who you are as you navigate birth and postpartum and motherhood.
Oh, for sure. What did it look like for you to even first conceptualize this? Was it your first birth? Was it, several subsequent births? You're like, somebody else might need to hear this.
Yeah. So, I have 3 boys. So I'll start with that. So I have, a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and then a almost 10-month-old. And I've always been very interested in blogging and sharing my story. And I've had different projects that I've worked on over the years, but Your Wild Birth was like kind of a shocker for me because I've always been very hook, line, and sinker when it comes to the maternity, like medical industry. I don't know, like I grew up not very, my mom was more holistic and I've always had a more holistic approach to medicine. But when it came to birth, I was always hook, line, and sinker. And then when I got pregnant with my 3rd child, something inside of me just said, you don't have to go yet. You don't have to go yet. And then 5 months into it, I'm still like, you don't have to go yet. And then that's when I pretty much decided I'm just not going to go. Just not going to engage in it at all. And that's where I started learning. And I started, I guess, almost trying to prove to myself that birth was safe. And in my processing of that, I started sharing what I was learning. And that's where Your Wild Birth came to be.
Yeah. Which is, I've loved your content, like I told you. It's been definitely this place where I've learned almost like alongside you, thinking, wait a minute, like you hear in the crunchy holistic community that, your body was designed to do this. You're fully capable of doing this. But then, you get pregnant, you walk into the hospital, and all of that goes out the window.
Exactly.
So it's been really cool just to see your content and your story as an encouragement and almost just like like you said, as you're learning yourself, this second voice to encourage you and be like, wait a minute, no, like that intuition, that belief, that feeling, that's
Right.
okay.
Yeah. And I think that's the heart of what I really hope that people can connect to. Because as much as I liked to think that I was a really intuitive person and a really, spiritual, holistic person, it really was not until I've given, like, I had a free birth with my third, and I did the wild pregnancy. Like, I literally did not go in to the doctor's office, the hospital. I didn't talk to a midwife. I didn't talk to
Yeah.
anyone the whole time. And I've been giving a lot of credit to my free birth for the growth that I experienced. But honestly, I think it was engaging and going through pregnancy without having anyone telling me that things were okay and following that
Hmm.
intuitive voice. I think that's really where the root of my growth began, because that was the first time in my life where, I mean, I had like everyone around me really just saying, "What are you
Yeah.
doing? Like, don't you want to make sure everything's okay?" And I just kept saying, "I know everything's okay. Like, it's okay. I already know." And that was the first time in my life that I had actually just listened to myself and been confident in that. It was very, I mean, it changed my life. It really did.
Yeah. So kind of walk me through that. You got pregnant, and of course, I can only imagine all the noise that comes with it, right? Like I'm
Right.
thinking about peeing on the stick, and then everybody's like, it just, it snowballs, right?
Right.
And the voices get louder and louder. So what was that even like to start making those initial decisions of like, no, I'm not going to go at, 8, 10 weeks to confirm my pregnancy. Like,
Well, I think, the story kind of starts even before I got pregnant with when I had my first child. And I walked
mhm.
through that entire pregnancy doing all the normal stuff. And I was determined, like, I'm not going to get the epidural. I'm going to have a natural birth. I'm going to breastfeed. I'm going to have all this stuff. And
Yeah.
all of it just went out the window. Like 10 hours into that labor, I got the epidural. I didn't breastfeed. I do commend myself for pumping with him, like for 9 months. It was an insane
Wow.
experience. I like never want to touch a breast pump ever again.
Yeah.
But even with all that, there was such a disconnect between me and myself, me and my child, me as a mother. And then when I had my second baby, I was all in on the medical. I was like, I can't do it.
Okay.
I'm one of those women that just cannot have a natural birth. Maybe it hurts more than other women's births do. Maybe I'm just not strong enough. I don't know. I just had all these stories. So I got to the hospital. I asked for the epidural, and they were like, sorry, it's too late. So I was like, all right, I
Hmm.
guess I'm going to have a
Okay.
natural birth then. And so after that experience, and then I had a few like things in postpartum that really just made me hate the newborn phase. And I just was putting all of that on birth and my baby and not anything outside of it. So I told my husband I'm done. Not having any kids.
Hmm.
I'm done with that. I can't do it. It's not for me. I love the two I
Yeah.
have. Let's just be done. And so a few years later, when I got like this need, I was like, I need a baby in my body right now. And it came out of nowhere and it didn't go.
Hmm.
So I was like, okay, fine. I'll give birth again. I'll have a new morning in, fine. And and so I got pregnant, and I I don't know. I mean, I just didn't feel like I needed to go. I was just like, I don't need to go for the first trimester. There's nothing they can do. And pretty much everyone agreed with me on that. They were like, yeah,
Sure.
fine. Like if something happens in the first trimester, there's really nothing you can do to reverse what's happening. Um, and so in that time, I started to learn about ultrasounds. And so I was like, am I going to be okay without the first trimester ultrasound? And I
Hmm.
realized, yes, and I actually may be better off. And then from there, it just spiraled. And so I was like, okay, well, if I didn't need the first trimester ultrasound, then what? what do I need? Do I need the second one?
Yeah.
Do I need the blood test? Do I need the due date? Do I need all this stuff? And that's where I started to question, what do I really need? And I think the final straw was that I was going to find out the gender. That's what I was going to do. I was like, okay, let's just go to one of those like tech places where you can just find out the gender and it'll just be fun. And
Yeah.
we'll know. I'm
Hmm.
going to have my family go with me, and it was going to be a whole big fun thing. And there was just something inside of me that said, knowing the gender is just not that important. Like you just don't need to know. Everything within me kept saying, don't go. And I just
Mm.
and then I found reasons why that was okay. And I think it was when I decided not to get the second trimester ultrasound, that's when I started getting all the pushback. That's when everyone was like, well, what about placenta previa? What about, you know, what for breech birth? What are you gonna do? Like, what if just all of those what ifs that like, what if you bleed out? What if this? What if that? And I just kept saying, like, if it happens, I can go to the hospital. And that was kind of my whole mindset. And that's, I don't know. I mean, like even with all of the pushback, I wish that I had like a secret for how I got through it. And the only secret is that I just did. I just kept coming back to myself.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I think that's super unique just to hear the dichotomy of the different births that you've had, because I think so many women, or at least in my own story, I'm thinking, you have a horrible negative experience, which like my birth was very similar with my son, did all the things at the hospital, and now I want to do all of the things not at the hospital.
Yeah.
Um, so that's just like really cool to hear, because that's a lot of women have to navigate this in pieces.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of grace for that.
Yeah.
So first, definition wise, somebody who's listening is like, wait a minute, you don't go to the hospital? Like you don't do any checks? How would you define that?
Yeah. I mean, I think everyone kind of has their own definition, but primarily the way I see it is that a wild pregnancy, I took a pregnancy test. I take like 5,000. I get
Yeah.
those like packs and I do like a
Yeah.
day just because it's fun to watch the line, get to. So, I mean, for me, a wild pregnancy includes a pregnancy test. For others, it might not. But otherwise, I mean, I did not step foot in a doctor's office. I didn't have a single midwife meetup. I called maybe two midwives to see if I would want them to attend my birth. And then I decided
Mm-hmm.
no. And then with the free birth, it was literally me and my husband at our house. That was it. So
Yeah.
kind of the distinction between the free birth versus like a home birth is that with a home birth, you're still going to have someone attending, like you pay someone to attend it. Some people find a free birth is including a doula. Some people don't. Um, but yeah, for me, it just meant it was just me and my husband, and that was it.
Yeah. That's a great point about just everybody else defining their births differently, because that, like you said, allows room for everybody to make their own decisions. That's the
Yeah,
point.
right.
So how can we begin to set healthy expectations, whether it's first time mamas or even for yourself? Like you said, subsequent births bring in,
Yeah,
just as mothers, like we carry all of this emotion. We're supposed to be emotional, we're supposed to be intuitive, but how do we set healthy
yeah,
expectations as we prepare for birth?
yeah. I think across the board, whether you're a first time mom or you're having birth again, um, just don't tell yourself it can't happen to you. Like I was very fortunate to have I mean, drama free. Like there was no drama at all with my third birth. It was painful, but I was prepared for it to be really painful. And, so if you go into birth believing, oh, it won't hurt that bad, or I'll be able to get
Mm-hmm.
through it, or it won't last that long, or there's no way my water would break before my labor starts. Like there's all of these things that are variations of normal that we typically hear about throughout our pregnancy. And I think the trouble starts, like if you want a natural birth, if you want to home birth, if you want to free birth, I think the trouble begins when we believe that those variations of normal could never happen to us. And, and I think it's really important to just prepare for that because I hear a lot of stories of home births where maybe a necessary transfer happens, but then a bunch of unnecessary stuff happens at the hospital because they never believed they would transfer. So I'm not saying expect that, all these things could happen to you, but it is a good idea to be prepared if it does. Like if you had to transfer, what would you consent to at the hospital? If you had a long labor, at what point would you personally choose to transfer if you would choose to? Like having those definitions decided for yourself before it actually happens is one of the best ways you can prepare. And primarily, especially for first time moms, don't ask yourself, how can I minimize the pain? What can I do to get rid of the pain? Ask yourself, what would I do if it was more painful than I believe I can handle? And what would I do in that scenario? Because that, like, I know for me personally, that was what got in the way of
Mm,
my first birth not being natural. I kept thinking, how can I make it not hurt? How can I make it hurt less? Even in my third
sure.
birth, I still did that. And I'm like,
Yeah.
been here before. I know better. And I'm still doing it. And as soon as you lean into it and you allow for the pain to like overtake you, that's when birth can happen. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be painful. It doesn't mean, I mean, you could experience a pain free birth, and that's wonderful. I believe that women can have that. And personally, I would love to experience that one day. Like, who wouldn't? But I also know I kind of can't decide that for
Hmm.
myself. And maybe that's a limiting belief, but in my experience, allowing it to be what it's going to be is the best way to approach birth.
Mm, absolutely. And I think that's so important when it comes into the conversation of, like you said, you heard all the what ifs from everyone else.
Yeah.
So, how would you encourage women that are walking the tension of, okay, this is how I set myself up by just being real with myself and the expectations for what if things don't go well? But how do you encourage against the what ifs from everyone else as you're trying to make these sacred decisions?
Yeah. Yeah. Cause I think we all know we already have a lot of what ifs happening within it. I mean, people look at women who choose alternative birth options, and there's kind of this assumption that we're just like not afraid, that we're not
Mhm.
thinking of everything. But the reality is, we're kind of already thinking about everything too much. Like, we're already overwhelmed by our own fear, I mean, I had thoughts during my free birth where I would wake up in the middle of the night and be like, this is a scam. I'm giving in to a scam. Like, birth is definitely dangerous, and I'm an idiot right now. Like, I had so many thoughts like that that I had to genuinely explore, like,
Yeah.
is this true? Is it true that birth could be dangerous? Is it true that I'm putting myself and my baby in harm's way? So, yeah, I was already facing all of that within myself on my own without any help from anyone. And and when it came to external questions, there were there were some genuine questions where I had the strength at that time to answer them the best that I knew
Mhm.
how to. And then there's there's the questions that are sort of rooted in someone else's fear that doesn't have anything to do with your own. And those are the questions where I really just had to put
Mhm.
up a wall. And there were some people that I didn't even really tell my plan to. That's always an option, to just
Yeah.
be vague about what you're planning on doing. Say you're not sure right now, say you're still figuring out, whatever you need to do. And that's okay, because if you feel like someone's not going to support you, it's not really your job to
Yeah.
accommodate that. And And that's the other area is there were some people where I had to lay down a line and say, look, I appreciate that you're afraid.
Yeah.
I'm afraid too. I appreciate that this is different, that you're not used to this, and that there's all of these fears, and I understand that you care. However, I can't take on your fear. So if you keep bringing me your fear, we cannot talk about this anymore. And that was just a really hard line that I had to lay down. And at the same time, in doing that, I like emerged as this incredibly powerful,
Wow.
confident woman that I literally never felt before because I've always been kind of a hothead. So when I get kind of pushed into a corner, my immediate reaction is to just blow up. And this was the first time in my life where I believed so strongly in what I was doing that I could lay down those boundaries calmly and confidently. And being able to do that completely elevated the way I show up for myself and my kids. So it's really hard to make these choices and then to deal with what other people think about them. But when you can find that confidence within yourself, I mean, it literally does elevate your life. It doesn't make it harder, it makes it easier.
For sure. And I think this ties in perfectly to creating a safe birth space. And I know you said for your third, it was just you and your husband, but what would it look like? Because boundaries will definitely be a part of that process to
Yeah.
create a healthy birth space and a safe birth space.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's sort of the big illusion of safety
Yeah.
overall. We think that having all the machines and the professionals around us is the most safe option. And honestly, I think Michelle Oden, she's like a big name in the birth space and especially with like the free birth and whatever. And I just recently read a book of hers, and I think that she describes the safe birth space better than I've ever seen it. So what she says is we have to take the humanity out of birth in order to make it safe, which is kind of a weird
Yeah.
concept. Humans, how do we do that? And basically, her whole theory is that we have those different parts of our brain. We have our subconscious where most of our bodily functions are happening. But what makes us distinct in the animal kingdom, what makes us human, is that front brain, that thinking brain, that cognitive ability to actually control, what our mind is doing to some extent. And with that new brain, that cognitive thinking brain, we've taken away our ability to lean into the inherently, normal bodily function that is birth. So when we're sitting there and we're thinking, does this need to happen? Is this okay? All these people are around me. All these people are talking to me. These bright lights are here. These beeps are over there. That's engaging our thinking brain. That's a very human thing. And when you compare our humanity to all of evolution and the animal kingdom, I would say that our body and its subconscious functioning is much more intelligent than our thoughts that are trying to control it. So, as Michelle Oden would say, to make birth more safe, we have to remove that thinking brain. We have to create a space that allows us to just function without
Mhm.
thinking about it.
Which is so hard,
It is hard.
right?
Yeah, I mean, and this is something I never expected, even in my free birth. I had the ingredients for a safe birth and non-humanized birth.
Yeah.
And it was dark. I was in small spaces. I was mostly private. I had my husband there, but that feels pretty private to me. Um,
Yeah.
and even in that, I tried to like midwife myself. So I had my own checklist of what should happen. I had my own ideas of what my body should be doing, what I can do. And I could feel myself in the front of my brain the whole time. And it was really hard and it was really scary and it was very painful. And I fully believe that being able to remove yourself from thinking and trying to control everything, that is the entire point of birth prep that I didn't even understand until after
Mm.
I was done preparing. Yeah, I thought I needed to read all the books, read all the studies, know all the right things. And all that did was get in my way.
Mm. Which I think that's so commonly the narrative for, like you said, towards the beginning, the more holistic women that are doing the research. We are the ones looking into behind the curtain. But I think that plays a role in us getting in our own way of being over researched. And like you said,
Yeah.
working in that first frontal lobe of thinking, I can rationalize the Western medicine with all the holistic alternatives, not realizing it's still going to create tension. What would you recommend for birth prep then? If it's not, you know, saturating your mind in all of the books, all of the things, how do we begin to prime our primal brain to prepare for birth?
Yeah. You know, I would like to say I'm good at this. I'm really not. So this is all like easier said than done kind of stuff. And to some extent, I think to some extent it's being okay if your brain gets in the way.
Yeah.
I mean, because trying to stop your brain from getting in the way is still trying to control the process, you know? So more than try and I think birth prep is so focused on what's literally going to happen in birth when there's so much more that we could be focusing on. I mean, there's all of the rest of motherhood. So birth is just that moment that we have to just get through. I say have to. I'm sure some
Yeah.
you would say get to. You know,
Sure.
that shows, how I feel. But I think primarily if you focus on your relationships, because what is it about birth that makes it easy? It's oxytocin. That's the hormone that we're going to feel that sends our blood all to the right places, that creates all of these really nice euphoric feelings. But you can't just make oxytocin happen. That's something you have to develop. It's something you have to work towards. So honestly, my best recommendation for birth prep is marriage counseling. Really.
Yes.
Yeah.
Say it louder for the people in the back.
And that was something I totally went over my head. And, it's not to say that I don't love my husband or cherish him, but it is to say we went into birth sort of just skating through our
Mhm.
relationship. And after my birth, we really focused on our relationship. It brought up so many areas where we were not connected the way we thought we were, the way we thought we were. We had so many holes and walls up that we never even noticed until after birth happened. And once we went through the free birth experience and then into postpartum, I really realized like we could have so much more here. And
Mm.
and there's something that I really have started to develop over the past few weeks. It's really just kind of sparked, and that is this concept of love. And if oxytocin is the hormone of love, and if oxytocin is the most essential hormone to have present in order to go through birth and be able to manage it and handle it, then we need to prioritize receiving oxytocin. So my whole theory for this is that we have what's called love actions. And that's the concept that love is not a feeling. Bonding and connection are the feelings that we feel. And that's the increased oxytocin that we feel, the increased dopamine that we feel when someone walks in the room, things like that. That's where the feelings come in. But love is the act of prioritizing bonding and connecting. And so the best birth prep, I believe, is indulging in love actions as often as possible.
Mhm.
Because then you have a direct line to oxytocin that you've developed, that you've created within yourself. And then at that point, you could feel oxytocin just by thinking of someone you love, like it can be that simple. And yeah, so if you're walking towards birth, indulge in building the bond and connection between you and your spouse. And if you don't have a spouse or you don't have a partner, then with yourself. That's also something you can develop as well. I mean, even if you have a partner, develop it with yourself too. But yeah.
Yeah. Isabel, that was so good. I totally, totally agree. And that was something my husband and I talked about early on, because we went through marital counseling before my son was born. And I think that's so important to our society right now, is to change the mindset or just mantra and narrative around counseling, because like stuff doesn't have to be falling apart to be able to internalize, look within, or even feel supported within your marriage or your relationship. So when it comes to birth, I totally agree. But how do we begin outside of the love actions? Or maybe that is the answer to this question. But how do we begin to equip our spouse to also prepare and be present for the birth process, or even just the
Yeah.
pregnancy as well?
Yeah. And that's tricky. I mean, it really is, because right now
Mhm.
men carry a lot of birth trauma and fear around birth that we really don't see until we get pregnant, and they're kind of just like over there huddled, like scared of everything
Yep.
that's happening. And I think the best thing we can do for men in terms of like the birth space and the realm of pregnancy, and especially in postpartum, is to just kind of help them realize it's not about them. And it sounds harsh and it
Mhm.
sounds difficult to say, because of course, they're the father. An incredibly important role. I can't think of anyone, whether they know their father or not, who doesn't feel a desire to have their father with them. And and so I think really it's important that men understand that their job is protection. And that's something that I think has been sort of forgotten. I think that we've put a lot of pressure on men to be like the emotional support, the helpers, all of that stuff. But ultimately, when they are protective over us, that is another form of love action, because they're showing us you matter to me. What you need matters to me. And when it comes to pregnancy, being part of helping to protect the woman's mind by not allowing like your mom or your sister or whoever to get in her head with all of
Yeah.
their own fears. And that's the same with postpartum, not allowing people that don't support your partner into her space while she's healing and learning how to care for this new baby. And that's, especially in birth, you can be close, you can hold hands, you can hug, you can kiss, you can do whatever it is that she's asking you to do. But it's not a requirement that your partner knows how to resuscitate a baby. I mean, if he does, great. But like, he doesn't have to know how to be the medical
Yeah.
professional or even the doula. He doesn't even really need to know any of that. In most cases, the best thing that a man can do in the birth space is move over there and just kind of wait until, if and when
Mm.
you're called over for connection to help build that oxytocin. So, the best way that men can prepare for birth is to just be prepared to be the protector, but to not feel the pressure to be an active part of it, you know?
Mm. That's so good. And I think that was one of the conversations my husband and I had quite often, not even necessarily in the birth process, because I think he definitely stepped in. He stepped in where he needed in the role that I asked him. But I think it's so important, like you touched on, not having the expectation for my husband, if we do decide to have a home birth or wild birth, to be the medical, like, he doesn't need to be my EMT,
Right.
right?
Yeah. And I think that's the expectation a lot of men have when they hear home birth. They think I don't know what to do if an emergency
Right.
happens. How am I supposed to save you? That's the thing. They're not the savior, they're the protector. And it's really important to get those two definitions distinct from each other.
And you've kind of touched on it a little bit in terms of postpartum, um, because I think the mental health conversation is really touchy sometimes for postpartum women. Because I think, I think environment plays a huge role. I think how your birth went plays a huge role. And like you said, your ability to make that connection as a mother is really hard sometimes when you were disconnected your entire pregnancy, or you went through 4 days like I did at the hospital with all the interventions and then completely disconnected. And then you're fully, everybody speaks over you like, "Oh, this is supposed to be the happiest moment of your life."
Right.
And you're like,
Yeah.
Okay. So, how do you think mental health plays into the postpartum early newborn phase?
Yeah. I mean, I think the trouble with the mental health conversation, when you look at it from the big scope of like what most people are saying, is there's a lot of blame placed on babies that is actually supposed to be on so many other things. So we say
Mhm.
like breastfeeding is really difficult. I've tried it 3 times. I've been successful 1 time. And my second time, I definitely got postpartum depression. And at the same time, my baby had nothing to do with it. And so we keep putting this emphasis on, well, the baby's not sleeping. So of course your mental health isn't good. Well, breastfeeding is really difficult. You're having trouble with it. So of course your mental health isn't really good. So we're putting all this blame on this newborn baby that has no say, no ability to change, who's also suffering probably their own mental distress, because if mom's not happy, how is baby going to be happy? And so I think the important thing in the conversation of mental health and postpartum is twofold. The first being we cannot discredit what a medicalized pregnancy does to you, what it can lead to. I mean, like the chances of intervention when you walk through and you do every single test, every single thing, you follow every single rule, whatever,
Yeah.
you're kind of just on this pace towards intervention. And then when you get to the birth and you have all of the interventions, I mean, an epidural just chemically suppresses your oxytocin. And if oxytocin is what bonds you to your baby, and then you are all fentanyled up on an epidural, and so is your baby because
Yep.
it does cross, and this is hard stuff to hear. This is hard stuff for me to say, knowing that I had an epidural, I mean, and I know what it's done and I could see the effects. And then, that's not even thinking about induction and cesarean and all of these things that are recommended to us so readily available to us, whether necessary or not, is really not the point. It's something that really should be taken more seriously and as something that impacts your postpartum. So when you're looking at this new mom who may have gone through all of those interventions and maybe even didn't, but she actually is exhausted and she is having a hard time breastfeeding, and you're looking at her and you're saying, well, maybe you should just switch to a bottle. Well, maybe you should let the baby cry in the other room. Well, maybe I should just hold the baby and you just go, do stuff around the house. That'll make you feel better. When that's your response to a woman who is struggling to connect with her baby and enjoy this time, who's already all hormonal just naturally, you're
Mhm.
not helping, not
Yeah.
helpful because you're making her bond to her baby the problem. So then you're continuing to tell her her natural urge to hold her crying baby is wrong. Her natural urge to feed her baby from her body is wrong, which is only going to send the depression into a bigger spiral when the real support is to say, yes, breastfeeding is hard, And it's okay if you sit in bed for 2 weeks and never do a single dish and let them pile up in the sink while you figure it out. Like, yes, being tired is hard, and it's okay if no one has clean clothes to wear for 3, 6, 8, and a
Mm,
million weeks while you rest and bond with your baby. Like, why is the first response put the baby down, not put the dishes down, put the laundry down, go get Chick-fil-A today? Who cares, you know?
wow. Absolutely. And I totally agree. And I think the image of the postpartum period has been sanitized through social media. Like, it plays a role in the expectation of, wait a minute, my house is supposed to be clean. I'm supposed to have a full face of makeup. Like,
Right.
I'm not supposed to be covered in milk and poop. And
Right.
I'm still literally bleeding everywhere. And
Yeah.
um, that was definitely something I fell into postpartum because I think that my body did the best that it could in the season to protect me and keep me safe. So honestly, like, I don't remember.
Right.
I literally don't remember the first 3 months of my son's life. But
Wow.
I think I had a completely medicalized birth. We had 4 days of interventions, and then we had a C-section. And then I was, like, sick, vomiting
Yeah.
on the OR table.
Yeah.
But all that to say, like, I think it comes back to managing expectations, like you said at the very beginning, and being prepared for not always being prepared
Right.
and having somebody in your space to be able to tell you it's okay to sit
Yeah.
down.
Yeah. I mean, that's really like, I just wish that I could like pop in as a little fairy to every postpartum woman who's doing the dishes
Yeah.
right now and say, stop, just put it down. Like, if you're postpartum right now listening to this and you're doing dishes, stop, go sit down. It's okay. Like,
Mm-mm.
I'm 10 months postpartum almost, and I have a pile of laundry sitting on the floor, and I do not intend on doing anything about it anytime soon. It's okay. Like,
Yeah.
that's really, I wish that was the message that women heard more often. Like, it's okay if your house
Mhm.
is not messy or that it is messy. Like, because I think, and then even with that, we're always told, well, just get support, make sure you have people around you. But in my second postpartum, I was living 11 hours away from my closest family member, and they all worked, and I didn't have the money to hire a postpartum doula. I didn't have those
Yep.
things. And again, I so wish I could go back and say, sit down, stop doing that.
Mhm.
Just be with the baby. It's okay. Because nothing, and even if it doesn't feel good to sit with your baby, even if that is still stressful, even if they're more fussy, even if you are tired, it feels a lot better to put your baby on your chest than it does to put them down and do the dishes.
Yes. I'm so thankful that you said that because I think that's not the common support or answer for women
Yeah.
when they're like, "Oh yeah, just get help," or "Where's your mama village?" And it's like, "Well, we're a military family. We're about to move. We're thinking
Right.
about planning our next pregnancy. We're gonna have to start over, our whole village." But we
Yeah.
also I'm so glad you said that there's also a financial component to seeking help postpartum, that families may just not
Right.
be in the season to, like, we may not be able to hire whoever to come in and help do the dishes or help do laundry or keep my toddler occupied because
Right.
I think especially
Right.
for subsequent births too, it's being super intentional about managing expectations. We have when you have another life running around and causing chaos.
Yeah. Yeah. That's pulling everything out of everything all the time. Yeah. You don't
Yes,
have to clean up.
absolutely.
It's okay. Yeah. And I think too, when the only other advice is either put the baby down or get someone to help you, you're still promoting that expectation that it has to look perfect. And it just doesn't.
And it doesn't. And it's okay to be covered in milk and spit up and poop.
And there's no time limit either, because we have to remember physically and mentally, and even with our children and their own personal brain development, postpartum isn't over at 6 weeks. Postpartum isn't over at 8 weeks.
Mhm.
Postpartum is not over at a year. Postpartum might start to be over around 2 years. So, just
Yep.
from like a physical and mental standpoint, our children aren't even brain developed enough beyond infancy until about 2 years. So they still need us for so long, and we need them as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. Isabel, this has been such a rich conversation. Definitely something I needed to hear as our family navigates, my husband and I navigate this conversation. So, do you have any resources? Where can our community connect with you and get plugged into where you're with?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always on Instagram at Your Wild Birth, and then I have a Substack where I have my podcast and newsletter, yourwildbirth.substack.com. And that's usually where I am. I have some workbooks that are available, and then I have more that I'm working on that anyone can grab whenever they want. And yeah, that's usually where I am.
Awesome. I'll link all of that. And so I have one final question that we'll close with. And I'm just super curious because you shared so much to our community so far. But if you could provide any wisdom to your younger self or for our community that is listening, what would you share?
So I've been thinking about this, and this is actually a question that's been coming up a lot for me anyway. So I think primarily what I've been thinking about a lot is that I wish I knew when I was younger is that every single person in the world is telling stories. They're telling stories about themselves. They're telling stories about you. They're telling stories about their life, whatever it is around them. That's all we're doing all day is just telling a story. And it's not your job to fit into their story about you or to control their story about you. You can't do it, and you don't need to do it. And especially when you're thinking about birth and postpartum and motherhood and how you indulge in those things and how you show up in birth, in postpartum, and in motherhood, everyone's going to have a predetermined story about what you're supposed to do, what's going to happen, what could happen. And you don't need to be a part of that. Like, you don't need to be a part of their story. And the only story that matters is the one that you have about yourself. And as long as your story about yourself is adding to a better life for you, that's all that matters.
Ugh, yes. Isabel, that was perfect. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'll link all of your stuff, and I can't wait to share this with our community. So we'll catch you guys in the next episode. Thank you for listening, friend. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you don't want to miss any wisdom or encouragement, be sure to subscribe to the show. And don't forget to rate and review. Your feedback means so much and helps our community grow. If you're looking for more wellness wisdom and free resources, head over to livingwiselywell.com or get connected with me on Instagram at wiselywell. And if you're looking for a break from the hurried health lifestyle, check out my Return to Rest resource for tangible ways to slow down and finally find rest.